Namaste, lads and ladies. Welcome back finally again to another tattoo story time. Now, I'm going to be jumping off where I did last time with my rose and talk about my British and Irish Lions crest. Now, about the crest, as you can see, as you saw from the thumbnail as well, um, we have the English rose, we have the Scottish. What is that flower? That's it's a very prickly flower. I can't remember what it's called, unfortunately. Not stinging nettle. I'm so sorry. I've completely forgotten what it was. The Welsh one is obviously of the Prince of Wales's crown. Obviously, there's also the involvement of their flower, which I believe is the cauliflower. Not cauliflower. That's a vegetable. The dandelion. Or the daffodil, sorry, the daffodil. I'm offending everybody here. And we also have the Irish shamrock clovers. Thistle, that's what it's called, a thistle. My apologies, I completely forgot what they were called. Anyway, yes, we're here to talk about the British and Irish Lions. If you'd like to have a closer look, there's a couple of things I've made change to this tattoo. Obviously, with this one, it's just the three-leaf clovers on the side of the rugby ball here with the stem at the bottom. I've got the exact same crown with the feathers at the top here. I couldn't put in a daffodil, I'm afraid, because there's just not much room on the hand. We have the thistle here with the very long leaves. They kind of look like feathers, oddly enough, and actually they really do look like feathers from here, but these are meant to be the leaves of the thistle. I don't know how he's done it, but he's managed to make them look like feathers, but honestly, it's a nice touch, really, nonetheless, really. And Brian also did this as well, fantastic artist. He's also left the English one in just plain white around it to emphasise, well, the white background and the fact that I'm English, basically. So obviously I'm more favoured towards England, basically. But if you don't know what the British and Irish Lions are, if you're not a rugby fan, basically, if you are, welcome, lads and ladies. Thank you all for joining me again for another little rugby talk. I love talking about rugby. I like watching rugby. I've played rugby my entire life as a fly half, basically. But if you don't know what the British and Irish Lions represent, they represent the 4 islands of Great Britain and parts of the UK. Obviously, you also have Ireland as well, which is why it's called the British and Irish Lions, basically. So we're not just excluding Ireland out from it, because let's face it, Ireland are probably the best or the second best in the world right now, especially after the debacle that's been going on with New Zealand at the moment. And I want to talk about the prowess of New Zealand and where it's gotten them at this point, really, because an awful lot of people tend to blame certain failures on either players' determination or lack of like work effort, basically. But it's really a number of things, basically, because if you like look at the South African team when they took on the autumn internationals last year, I believe, that was interesting because they pretty much beaten everyone apart from England, and that was a very close loss to England. What was interesting about that game, though, is that England gave away like well over 16 penalties. So really, South Africa should have capitalised on that, no matter what. Really, no matter how you look at it, South Africa should have run away with that win. Thankfully, England managed to pull through, and we were able to get the win. But it's the small things that don't make sense with certain teams, basically, like what's been going on with the All Blacks recently, with their recent series loss against Ireland, in England taking their series in Australia, Argentina managing to overpower Scotland after a brilliant comeback, basically, and what's the other team? Yes, Wales and South Africa. Wales did a very good game, like the second game when they managed to come back. Sorry, and then South Africa obviously showed their power with their forwards, basically, because South Africa's forwards are probably the best in the world at the moment. Well, maybe it depends on the pack, basically, like on who's playing, because I think with certain players, like if you had Furlong in Ireland, like if Furlong was in the forwards, he'd be very difficult to deal with, and especially Marler in England's pack, basically, because Marler's a very interesting wind-up merchant. You know, it's not that we want him for his forward skills. He's a brilliant forward. It's just his wind-up ability. He's able to like really get under the skin of the people that's playing against him, especially with Elwyn Jones as well. Elwyn Jones is probably the greatest wind-up merchant of the Welsh team, basically. It's something you really want on your side, basically. It gets under their skin. That's kind of like what he did with Carl Sinclair, basically, in one of our games against them. How they're able to get him off the field because he kind of had a little bit of a loose temper. I love Carl Sinclair. He does an awful lot of good charity work for his borough in London, basically, and he's done an awful lot of good help for his family and all that, which is lovely to see. Really, like to see Carl flourish into the rugby player that he is, basically. And obviously, I can just sit here and talk about like them all day long, basically, especially with what's been going on recently within the England camp of whether or not if Marcus Smith is up to the task of being a number 10. I think he is, but I feel like he needs a little bit more time to gel well with Owen, because I feel like with Owen Farrell, he's a brilliant kicker. He's a brilliant rugby player, and I feel like he'd like get better with his dad coaching him and his England team, basically, because at the moment he's coaching Ireland, but we don't know what's going to happen after the 2023 Rugby World Cup, or even before that. We're not so sure, because especially what's been going on with the All Blacks coaching staff, like with Foster at the moment. They have so many people like screaming to get him out, basically. I mean, I understand they had like 1 or 2 losses against very good teams like France, Ireland, and South Africa and all that. But that's to be expected, really. When you're facing like very good teams, you're obviously going to lose. With New Zealand, though, they've gotten to that stature of being above the pedestal, basically. They're the only country to win the World Cup, like, backwards and forwards 2 times, basically. I think Richie McCaw, I believe, was their... Was it Kieran Reid who was their captain? No, Richie McCaw was the only New Zealander to lift the Webb Ellis Cup 2 times in a row between championships, basically. I don't know if he was the captain of that time. No, because I think Kieran Reid was the captain in 2015. They might have had multiple captains, I'm not so sure. But yeah, the interesting thing with the All Blacks is how they've kind of had a fall from grace, but I feel like with the England's attitude towards like losing or like having a bad day, it's kind of like not seen as much within the All Blacks camp, if you know what I mean. So because they haven't like lost as much, they don't have much time to like really think about on the things that really like pushes them and drives them to be the best that they are, really. It's kind of the same thing with England, really, because England, we have kind of like a them versus us attitude when it comes to rugby, basically, because it's sort of the case, really, when it comes to certain teams. Because I feel like we use the whole them versus us as a way of pushing us across the line to push a little bit further to something that we need more, basically. Yes, it can be quite... there's an awful lot of animosity, basically. There's a bit of, violence when it comes to the rugby game with England sometimes, but then what team doesn't have that, basically? And I feel like you need that within your side of rugby if you hope to like be somewhat intimidating, because the haka is intimidating and all, but it can only take you so far, which is what I've noticed with the recent game when they did their haka against South Africa. It was rushed. It was kind of like, oh, right, let's just do this for the motion and not... They didn't put their heart into it, and you can tell when they don't put their heart even into the haka, then you know that their heart isn't going to be in the game of rugby, basically, which is a shame, because I know South Africa are like cheering that they've beaten the All Blacks in the first game out, basically, for the Rugby World Championships over there in like 2022. As is Australia, managing to beat Argentina by at least 2 tries or so, but it was very close between those two, really. But either way, it was interesting nonetheless. But I don't think South Africa would want to win like in this way, basically. Because South Africa and New Zealand have had that history ever since like 1995, all the way up to of recent times, basically, of South Africa losing recently to New Zealand in the previous Rugby World Championships. But with now, it's kind of looking like that the All Blacks have lost that oomph, and if they don't find it soon enough, then they're not going to achieve like that winning like glory that they have always tasted basically, compared to the other teams that have always been hungry for it. That's the case like with boxers. You know, if you're on top for most of the time, you lose that hunger basically. It's just a shame to see them really how they were in that game. Like if you haven't seen the game, it was very one-sided. Like their forwards were pretty much dominating, apart from one little slip up from their side after losing one of their guys to a red card. It was a very horrible charge down. The guy literally like went under one of the guys and sent him up in the air, and then he landed on his head. Too rightly so, he was sent off with a red card and all that, but they were still able to come back with one try to level it out to 26-10. So yeah, it's kind of a shame to see the All Blacks as they are now at the moment, basically, especially with how much fight they've given, like the British and Irish Lions, basically. Now, with the British and Irish Lions, we always have our little annual thing with the Australians, the South Africans, and the New Zealand lot from time to time, every single 4 years. Recently, it was South Africa, and I believe next time it will be Australia. So, fingers crossed, we will do well against Australia, with especially how England were able to hold up against them this year. Like, them having that close first win was a very that was a gift horse that they looked in the eye, basically. That was ours to lose, basically. They were 14 men down, and, you know, they did brilliantly to come back and get the win. Thankfully, we were able to come back and get the second and third win, basically, but nonetheless, you've got to give them, like, praise where it's at, basically. Australia, with a very battered and injured side, held up very well against England. Whereas in the British and Irish Lions pact, there was an awful lot of controversy with the 2017 Lions tour. It was either the 2017 or the 2013. I'm not so sure, because I think that was the one where I think O'Driscoll was playing at the time, and I think when he retired was like 2014. So this must have been the time when they dropped him from the team, which was kind of surprising, really, because Brian was like the best Irish rugby player for any like period of their time playing, really. So it was such a surprise when Brian O'Driscoll was dropped, really. But 2017 was probably the most memorable, because it was probably the first and only time that we'd ever took on the All Blacks and fought them to a draw. I believe we won the first game quite resoundingly, or it might have been close. I can't quite remember the actual scores, but I know New Zealand basically fought back and like made us pay for, you know, taking that win in the first game to having us. I think we only got like 9 points in that game, where they got over 20 or something like that. So then it was now down to us to really rally back and take them on at their own game, basically. And I think this was at Eden Park. Yeah, we took them on at Eden Park. They still haven't lost at Eden Park, so I commend them for that, basically, to have a record that is like barely blemished, basically, compared to like other countries that have had theirs like tarnished over time, basically. So it was interesting how it ended. That it was beautiful how it ended, because with so much fight, so much sweat and blood that we put into it, like the Irish, the Scottish, and the Welsh and the English, we might tear at each other's throats from time to time when we play rugby. But when we come together for the British and Irish Lions, like, at least in my mind, we give as good as we can, basically, when it came to like the world's greatest rugby nation, that is New Zealand, basically. So for us to be able to draw, like, I saw Owen like kick that kick right over the sticks when I was watching back in 2017, and I like jumped for joy. That, you know, I was just like, thank God we like drew, because I don't think we had it in us to go for the try, basically. The interesting thing is, I know you should always go for the win, but in those circumstances where time is ticking down, where they can just do penalty after penalty after penalty to slow you down, yeah, they don't care if they like lose a man. It's the last game, basically. They'll be 14 men down, they don't care. They'll basically stop you from getting that winning try. So the only thing that Owen could do in that moment was get the draw, basically. So I praise him for that. There was also some controversy with, I think, what was it? There was like an intentional knock-on or something like that. And so it was just redeemed as a penalty. There was like no yellow or anything like that, which was kind of surprising, because now these days, if you commit a either an unintentional knock on or a deliberate knock on. Like if it's deliberate, then it's technically a yellow or a red card depending on the severity of it. I mean, unless you've like tried to catch the ball, if you've just knocked it out of your hand, then that's a red card. But if it's a yellow if you try to at least try to catch it, if you like made an attempt to try and catch it rather than just like sticking your hand out and blocking it basically. Something like that similar happened because I was watching Kieran talking with the ref. I don't know which ref it was, but Kieran made the argument that, you know, since it's a knock on, it should at least be considered uh, like a penalty or something like that if it was deliberate. But I think the ref said something along the lines of, "Oh no, it was unintentional. So it's just going to be a scrum. It's just going to be a scrum penalty basically." And so that's what led to the very confusing aspect of New Zealand basically getting robbed of a win in my mind basically. I mean, yeah, if you look at it from a New Zealand point of view, they should have won that game, and technically they should have, after that penalty basically, depending if it was deliberate or not. Because if it's a deliberate knock on, then that should be a free penalty kick. That should be a free goal kick towards New Zealand, no matter how it is. The rules are there. They're not meant to be broken, nonetheless. But with refs these days, they kind of like take the rules into their own hands and sometimes bend them to the point of where it's like, okay, you need to have some consistency, because they did this in Ireland's game against New Zealand, where in one game the New Zealand kind of like they headbutted one another. He headbutted an Irishman, and then in the second, like in the first game he got a red card, he got sent off. But in the second game, the Irishman like charged him, hit him square on the head with his own head. He never like changed heights or directions, never even bothered to wrap. He just ran straight into his head, and the Irishman just gets sent off with a yellow. Where's the consistency? So there's this balance of rugby at the moment where you want it to be safe, but then you have to keep it interesting and keep it free flowing. But the problem is, whilst it's free flowing, you then lose the opportunity to like catch out the nuances of bad behaviour, penalties, and you know, like stuff that goes on within the game basically that TMO is used for. Problem is with TMO is that it slows the game down too much. But then at the end of the day, we need safety in rugby, especially with how dangerous some of the collisions have been recently basically. Like with the whole HIA thing, I think that's definitely necessary, but I feel like substitution should be more like flexible when there's a HIA involved. You know, I feel like if you have a scrum half off, then you should be able to have an extra scrum half depending on the position that you are basically, because if you don't have a scrum half, then you have to have a forward fill in as a scrum half, and then that just like throws things out of whack because the scrum half who is a forward can't get into position quick enough because he's not built to be a scrum half basically. It's like asking you know, a fullback to fill in as a prop. That's never going to work. The fullback is meant to be at the back ready to catch the high balls basically, compared to like the forward who is meant to take in most of the scrums, all of the heavy lifting basically. The forwards move the backs closer to the goal so they can work their magic and kick towards the goals basically. The forwards carry the backs, well, on their literal backs basically. So having to make those substitutions in a game that's as confusing as today, where there's like a new rule that's came in, which is the 50-22, that allows you, so like if you kick it from the 50-metre line and then you hit their 22-metre line and it goes out, then it's your line out basically. That's a cool rule. I like that rule. The whole red card 20-minute thing, kind of up in the air about that, but I feel like if you're going to get a red card and get sent off for the rest of the game, and then it's 15-14, you know, 15 versus 14 men within that time frame, like depending on if it's like 5 minutes in or 50 minutes in, that makes a big difference overall to the game basically, because if it's 5 minutes in, then there's going to be a big advantage, but if it's 15 minutes in, then not much of an advantage just happened because everyone is practically exhausted at that point, so no one can really gain the upper hand. But then it comes down to punishing players basically. You know, players need to learn that there's a severity to what they do when they get red cards and yellows basically. These days though, like I feel like with the England lot, we are penalising ourselves way too much. We are giving away too many penalties, conceding way too many penalties. Although we did very well this time round in the recent tests against Australia, I think we only got one yellow, something like that. I think we actually got away with one yellow because I think there were one or two incidences where we should have gotten a red, but it didn't happen. So kind of surprising there, really. So there has to be some sort of fair game when it comes to each game, but then it has to be free flowing at the same time. I know I'm just rambling about it, but that's just the thing. That's the beauty about rugby, because especially during that one game in 2017 where we raised the cup together with New Zealand, in that draw, that was probably the most special moment to be a British and Irish Lions fan. Basically, that was like the closest we ever got to beating the All Blacks at Eden Park. Like, I'll take a draw any day against the greatest nation of rugby players, basically, and I'll easily admit that they are one of the best, if not the greatest rugby nation of all times, especially with Dan Carter. Dan Carter is up there for the all-time best fly half. I mean, he's got the highest grossing scores of any fly half, but to me, I have to go with Johnny. I have to be biased. I have to go with Johnny because he's just born and bred. He's the reason I got into rugby, basically. He's the reason I became a fly half, basically. The man is just a legend in my eyes. But then again, Dan Carter is also one of the greatest. Like, there was this one kick. I can't remember who he did it against, but it was the most damn beautiful goal I'd ever seen him kick. He was kicking with his left foot, and I think he was banking on the wind, basically, and it paid off perfectly. He kicked it towards like the right hand side, like just in front of the goalpost, and then the wind swooshed in and pushed the ball straight into the goalpost, right in between. When I saw that, my jaw dropped. I never seen a kick like that before. That was probably the greatest kick I'd ever seen. That probably tops Johnny Wilkinson's 2003 World Cup winning goal drop. And it's not even that Johnny Wilkinson's thing was special. I know he just kicked it off of his right foot, which was his lesser foot, basically. It's his less kicked foot. But that's what made it unique, basically. Kind of like with David Beckham's right foot and David Beckham's left foot, basically, with that free kick against Greece. That was rememberable because of that moment, basically. Whilst Dan Carter is memorable for the points he's gathered and the legacy he's left behind, basically. Not that Johnny Wilkinson hasn't left a legacy, but I feel with Johnny, he's had kind of a troubling time being a rugby player, especially with all the stress and all the pressure that he's put himself under. Because he was his biggest critic, Johnny Wilkinson, and, I respect him for what he has and what he has done, basically. But to be able to put yourself under that much immense pressure, it must have been horrible. Because I remember seeing this one time when he was playing. He was very skinny at this one point. He was very, barely any weight on him and all that. He was sweating bullets. He was very small. For him, basically, just being like a back as it was, he was already small compared to the other rugby players. So it was really upsetting to see him the way he was, really, when it came to pressurising himself to be better, to be the best as it is. And I like how James Haskell mentions this with him, when he faced him when he was playing with was it Toulouse? Yeah, I think he was with Toulouse at the time. Probably the best French club of all time, really, with Toulouse, with their expertise with rugby and their brilliant championship wins and their brilliant players and all that. There was this halftime show where there were these girls dancing and stuff like that, and James was just looking and enjoying the sights and sounds and all that, really enjoying the thing, which you should from time to time. You should enjoy it, but not during the game, mostly after. And he just looks over at Johnny, who's just deadpan, straight ahead, serious as can be, basically. Kind of like how Elwyn Jones is. Elwyn Jones treats rugby like it's his life, it's like his life and death, basically, and that's why I respect Johnny for it. And James says that, that's the one thing I was envious about Johnny, is if I was just a little bit more serious, then, I could have been where he is, basically, Not that James doesn't deserve what he's achieved, basically, because he's been brilliant. He won the Six Nations Grand Slam with his team of England back in 2000 and either 16 or 17. I think it was 17. Yeah, This was around about the same time the British and Irish Lions were going off to New Zealand to do their thing, basically. So I don't fault James in any way, shape or form, really. You know, the man is a brilliant rugby player. He's given his heart for his club of Wasps, basically. And it's the same with Johnny Wilkinson, basically. He's done everything for his country, and we're thankful for it, basically. Like, we're thankful for every single man and woman that wears the British and Irish Lions like jersey, basically. It's the same with the England jersey and the Irish and the Welsh and the Scottish jersey, basically. You're representing your home, you're representing your country, basically. That's what sports is all about, really, isn't it? So for them to be able to raise their country's flag and wear their jersey against, like, to go against these other fantastic teams is just something beautiful, really, in its retrospect. So that's why I wanted to get this tattoo as a representation of our four great countries, because that's what we are. We are Great Britain at the end of the day, really. We're just four small little islands that came together to make something great out of it. So, with that, lads and ladies, I thank you all so much for watching another one of my little ramble videos. I enjoy the little tattoo story times that I do with you guys, basically. If you enjoy the little thumbnails, I'll be making an awful lot more of them. I've noticed now that I can just do thumbnails by taking pictures. So, I will be focusing a little bit more on that. I'm learning as I go along. The editing should be a little bit more improved over the time, basically. So, you know, just have some patience with me. I'm still learning, as we all are. So, with that, lads and ladies, thank you ever so much. Next thing you'll see me in around here, I'll probably try and finish off God of War. And I'm going to take a break from novels for a while and focus a little bit more on maybe some tattoo story times and stuff like that. At least until God of War Ragnarok comes out, because I will be playing that for you guys to enjoy. So, with that, lads and ladies, yet again, thank you ever so much for watching, and I will see you all in whatever I do next around here. Take care, my friends.